I never thought my own girlfriend would destroy my reputation with one calculated lie. I'm 27, a systems analyst, and I had spent 3 years in what I thought was a solid relationship. That ended the night she stormed into our friend group's dinner and accused me of cheating. She had proof screenshots of location pins and messages that painted me as a liar. Within hours, I was branded unfaithful. Friends stopped answering, colleagues whispered behind my back, even my manager pulled me aside about trust concerns. I was being buried under evidence I knew was fabricated. The betrayal burned, but the deeper sting was the precision with which she'd set me up. What she didn't realize was that I understand data better than most people, and GPS logs don't lie. If I was going down, I was taking the truth with me, and I was going to expose every digital thread of her scheme. My name is Daniel Cole. I'm 27 years old, male, and I work as a systems analyst for a mid-sized logistics company in Chicago. My life, up until 6 months ago, was boring in the best way possible. I spent my weekdays buried in code, data dashboards, and audit reports, and my weekends were usually split between video games with my buddies and dinners with my girlfriend, Hannah. We'd been together for 3 years, and although I had quietly started thinking about proposing, she seemed perfectly content with the way things were. That illusion shattered on a Thursday night. We were at a dinner with mutual friends at a place called Rossi's Trattoria, a cozy little Italian spot downtown. I remember the smell of garlic and roasted peppers drifting from the kitchen, the clink of wine glasses, and the low jazz playing in the background. I had just twirled a forkful of spaghetti when Hannah stood up, her face pale but her voice sharp enough to cut through every conversation at the table. "Daniel's been cheating on me," she announced, phone in hand. At first, I laughed, an awkward, reflexive laugh. I thought it was some kind of dark joke. But then she held up her screen, displaying what looked like a string of text messages and location pins. They showed me driving across town late at night, supposedly parked outside an apartment building, with messages that implied I was meeting someone else. The table fell silent. Our friend Marissa muttered, "Oh my God." Another friend, Jason, just stared at me, shaking his head. I tried to protest, tried to say this wasn't true, but Hannah had already passed her phone around the table. Every pair of eyes that looked at it seemed to shift with judgment. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. By the end of dinner, people were avoiding eye contact. Hannah stormed out without touching her food, and I was left with a cold plate of pasta and a reputation collapsing in real time. Walking back to my apartment that night, I couldn't shake the sting of betrayal. Not just her accusation, but the precision of it. The screenshots weren't sloppy fakes, they looked convincing, lined up with timestamps, and even referenced locations that I drove past regularly. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I hadn't cheated. And if those messages and pins weren't real, then someone had gone out of their way to create them. I didn't realize it then, but the lie she had launched into the world that night was only the first move in a very deliberate campaign. And I was about to fight back with the only weapon I truly trusted: data. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. Group chats were lighting up with fragments of gossip. "Did you see Hannah's post? Damn, that's cold. Guess he wasn't who we thought he was." My stomach dropped. Hannah had taken the screenshots public. A carefully cropped carousel of images, posted to her Instagram story, showing my late-night trips and suspicious messages. She even added captions like "trust broken forever" and proof that data never lies. The irony almost made me laugh. Because data does lie, when someone forges it. I studied the screenshots carefully. Years of working with audit logs and security reports had trained me to spot anomalies most people would miss. At first glance, everything looked airtight: timestamps aligned, message bubbles consistent with my texting style, Google Maps pins showing me near an apartment complex I'd never set foot in. But small things nagged at me. Font rendering: the text in one of the screenshots didn't perfectly match my phone's default layout. It was close, very close, but slightly too compressed. Location metadata: one map pin was dropped at a building listed as under construction in my company's urban logistics database. Meaning the app shouldn't have even had a registered address for it. Battery indicator: in one screenshot, the battery icon reads 78%, but in the next, taken supposedly 6 minutes later, it read 80%. Lithium batteries don't charge themselves in 6 minutes without being plugged in. Individually, these quirks might have passed unnoticed. Together, they screamed forgery. Still, the evidence was strong enough to poison perception. By lunch, Jason had unfollowed me, Marissa had sent a passive-aggressive text saying she didn't want to be in the middle of things, and even my manager, Colin, called me into his office. He cleared his throat, not meeting my eyes. "Daniel, I don't want to pry into your personal life, but some things have a way of bleeding into professional spaces. If there's truth to what's circulating, it could impact trust with our clients. That hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just about Hannah anymore, it was about my job, my livelihood. That night, I pulled up my Google Maps timeline history. Unlike screenshots, raw GPS data can't be photoshopped, not without root access and a full device compromise. I downloaded my entire location log for the week in question. The JSON file was massive: coordinates, timestamps, speed of travel, even orientation data. Cross-referencing it with the screenshots, I spotted the first real crack. According to Hannah's proof, I had been parked outside 1816 West Lincoln at 11:48 p.m. on a Tuesday. My GPS log told a different story. At that exact timestamp, I was still inside my apartment, connected to my home Wi-Fi, with a location variance of less than 5 meters. The device ID, IP address, and timestamp all corroborated it. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. The screenshots didn't just feel wrong, they were wrong. And I had the raw data to prove it. But proving it to myself wasn't enough. If Hannah had gone this far to forge evidence, she wasn't going to back down easily. She would double down, escalate, and twist every word I said. If I wanted to survive this, I'd need more than just inconsistencies. I'd need an airtight case that no one could argue with. If Hannah's first strike had been the public accusation, her second was the silence that followed. Not hers, mine. Everyone else's. By the end of the week, the walls around me had closed in. My group chat with college friends had gone from daily memes and banter to total quiet. When I posted in it, just a simple, "Anyone up for drinks Friday?" the message sat unanswered, like it had been fired into a void. At work, colleagues who once stopped by my desk to talk football or ask about a code snippet now only came if they had to. And when they did, they kept it clipped, professional, and awkward. Hannah had been careful. She didn't call me names. She didn't scream. Instead, she let the screenshots do the talking. She'd crafted the perfect weapon, one that made her look sympathetic while making me radioactive. People didn't want to confront me, or even talk about it, they just wanted to quietly step away, so they wouldn't get burned standing too close. The worst blow came from my family. My younger sister, Molly, called me late one night. Her voice was soft but edged with disappointment. "Dan, just tell me the truth. Did you really cheat on her?" Hearing that question from her hurt more than Hannah's accusations ever could. Molly had always looked up to me, the stable older brother who never got into trouble. Now she sounded like she didn't know me at all. I denied it, of course. I explained about the GPS logs, the anomalies in the screenshots. But to her, it probably sounded like a rehearsed defense. I could almost hear her shrug on the other end. "Okay, if you say so." Then she hung up. The campaign was working. Hannah wasn't just attacking me, she was isolating me. Every rumor, every screenshot, every subtle nudge pulled another person out of my orbit. And the thing about isolation is that it doesn't just strip you of support, it makes your enemy stronger. Every person who turned away from me became one more sympathetic ear for Hannah. She was building her credibility on the ruins of mine. But the more people abandoned me, the sharper my resolve became. If she wanted to play this game in the court of public opinion, I'd play it in a different court, the court of data, timestamps, and verifiable truth. That weekend, I started drafting a timeline. On one side, Hannah's evidence screenshots, posts, accusations. On the other, my raw GPS logs, Wi-Fi connection history, rideshare receipts, and bank statements. At first, the contrast was subtle. A 6-minute gap here. A battery inconsistency there. But the deeper I dug, the more the inconsistencies multiplied. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was preparing for a counterattack, because the one thing Hannah hadn't counted on was that I lived and breathed digital footprints. I understood metadata like she understood manipulation. And she had left fingerprints all over her lie. When people think of digital evidence, they think of what's on the screen, the screenshot, the message bubble, the photo. But that's the surface. The truth lives underneath, in the metadata, the hidden stamps and codes that record when and where something was created, what device produced it, and whether it's been tampered with. And metadata doesn't care about feelings. It doesn't bend to storytelling. It just sits there, quietly marking reality. I started with Hannah's screenshots. She hadn't sent me the originals, of course. Everything I'd seen was compressed through Instagram or forwarded from friends. But even compressed files carry traces. When someone screenshoots a text thread, the image inherits data from their device, resolution, file size, even orientation. The first red flag jumped out immediately. One of the images she posted was supposedly from my phone, showing a late-night text to unknown. But the resolution of the screenshot, 1170 by 2532 pixels, matched her iPhone 12's native display, not my Pixel 5's. My phone outputs 1080 by 2340. That mismatch alone was damning. Then I dug deeper. Using forensic tools I kept from past projects, I parsed through the file headers of the reshared screenshots. Even after Instagram stripped most metadata, there were remnants. The time zone tag on 2 of the images read UTC-5. My phone, set to automatic network time, always defaulted to UTC-6 in Chicago. Hannah's phone, however, UTC-5. She had family in New York and never bothered to switch her device back after visiting. It was like finding her fingerprints on the murder weapon. But GPS logs, that was my ace. I exported my location history from Google Takeout into raw JSON and fed it into a visualization tool. Pinpoints appeared on a map, strung together like a breadcrumb trail of my movements. Every location, every timestamp, all corroborated by satellite data and Wi-Fi triangulation. On the Tuesday night she claimed I was parked outside that apartment, my GPS showed something else entirely, me at home, streaming Netflix on my smart TV. The logs showed not just my phone's coordinates but the MAC address of my router, the signal strength, the handshakes between devices. A complete, immutable chain of custody proving I hadn't moved an inch. The data was airtight. But airtight isn't enough when the other side is spinning a story. People don't want raw JSON files, they want something they can understand. I needed to translate the complexity into a narrative as compelling as hers. Screenshots are emotional, GPS logs are clinical. To win, I had to turn my cold data into a weapon sharp enough to cut through her lies. I began cataloging everything into a master folder. Original GPS files, unaltered, with SHA 256 checksums for verification. Screen recordings of me exporting the data, timestamped. Rideshare receipts, showing trips I paid for when she claimed I was somewhere else. Even my Nest camera logs, showing my apartment door unopened during nights she said I was out cheating. The more I built, the calmer I felt. Her evidence was flashy, emotional, and fragile. Mine was quiet, technical, and indestructible. And yet, I knew her. Hannah wouldn't stop. She'd double down. The next move wasn't about proving myself right. It was about waiting for her to make one mistake too many. And when she did, metadata would bury her. By the second week, I stopped reacting to the whispers and stares. Every rumor felt like smoke, thick, choking, but ultimately empty. What mattered was tracing the fire. I knew Hannah's screenshots alone wouldn't be enough to sustain her story forever. To maintain credibility, she'd have to keep producing new evidence. That meant more forgeries, more digital fingerprints, more chances for her to slip. And she did. 3 nights later, a new set of screenshots appeared on her Instagram. This time, they showed me ordering rideshare trips across town late at night. A neat trail of Uber receipts, cropped to show pickup and drop-off times that matched her original cheating narrative. At first glance, they were convincing. But I've filed enough expense reports to know the smell of doctored receipts. I pulled my actual Uber history from the app. The trips she showed didn't exist. Not just altered, fabricated. And here's the thing, real Uber receipts contain dynamic QR codes at the bottom for verification. The ones in her screenshots were static, flat images. No scannable data. It was a smokescreen. I expanded my net. Beyond rideshares, I pulled bank statements, every card charge, cross-checked against nights she said I was out. My Chase statement showed Netflix rentals and grocery runs, not bar tabs or late-night charges. Phone records, carrier logs showing outgoing calls and data usage. On nights I was with someone else, the logs placed me squarely at home, connected to Wi-Fi. Smart devices, my Nest door sensor showed no entries or exits past 10 p.m. The thermostat logged steady indoor temps, no sudden drops from doors opening to the winter air. Piece by piece, I built a dossier, not just disproving her claims but showing a pattern. Every piece of her evidence was fabricated, while mine was corroborated across multiple independent sources. But here's the problem with airtight evidence, no one wants to hear it until they have to. People weren't going to read JSON files or parse QR codes. They'd nod, smile, and secretly still believe her version, because hers was simple. Mine was complex. That realization changed my approach. I started creating visual exhibits, side-by-side comparisons of her screenshots against my unaltered data. Her Uber receipt versus my official PDF. Her location pin versus my Google timeline map with raw coordinates. Her battery anomaly next to my phone's actual system logs. It was like constructing a case file for a trial. A trial I knew was coming. But Hannah wasn't careless. She was precise, deliberate. Each forgery was crafted to look just plausible enough. That told me she believed in her ability to manipulate perception. She wasn't sloppy. She was arrogant, and arrogance leaves cracks. The smoke was thick, but the paper trail was real. I didn't just want to prove she was lying, I wanted to catch her in the act of lying. Because a forged receipt can be dismissed. But a live contradiction? That's irrefutable. By the third week, the lie had gained momentum of its own. I could feel it every time I walked into the office, conversations that stopped the second I entered the break room, glances traded between colleagues when I passed in the hall. My work was still getting done, but Colin, my manager, started checking in twice a day. His tone was friendly, but I could hear the unspoken question behind every visit: "Can I still trust you?" Outside of work, the pressure was even worse. Hannah wasn't content just to smear me once. She escalated. She started posting updates. More screenshots. Supposed DMs from her friends who claimed to have seen me out with another woman. Even a grainy photo, taken from behind, of someone in a jacket that looked like mine walking into a building. That photo spread like wildfire. The caption: "Caught." The comments were brutal. "Wow, the audacity. She deserves better. Once a cheater, always a cheater." None of them noticed, or cared, that the building in the photo was in a different part of town than where I lived, or that the timestamp didn't match the alleged night. To them, the image was enough. Hannah knew what she was doing. Each new piece of evidence wasn't about proving the truth, it was about overwhelming me, flooding the narrative until the sheer volume of her claims drowned out my denial. And it was working. Molly stopped answering my calls. Jason blocked my number. Even Marissa, who'd once been Hannah's friend more than mine, texted me, "You should stop fighting this. It's only making you look worse." That message hit like a brick. I realized then what Hannah's real strategy was: isolation plus pressure. She didn't need to prove anything beyond a shadow of a doubt. She just needed to bury me under enough doubt that no one cared about proof anymore. But the more she pushed, the more determined I became. Pressure has two effects: it either crushes you, or it forges you into something sharper. So I sharpened. I doubled down on the investigation. Every night after work, I sat in front of my dual monitors, combing through logs. I pulled server sync times from my phone carrier. I exported every Google location log for the past 6 months. I cataloged Uber, Lyft, bank statements, Nest data, layer after layer of digital records that all told the same story: I hadn't cheated. And I started planning how to weaponize it. Screenshots alone wouldn't cut it. I needed to expose not just the forgery, but the forger. I needed a way to push Hannah into contradicting herself, publicly, undeniably, with data I could verify in real time. Because I knew one thing about liars: the more pressure you apply, the more desperate they become, and desperation breeds mistakes. Hannah had turned my life into a pressure cooker. But she forgot something. I was the one holding the valve. The weekend after Hannah dropped the grainy photo, I turned my apartment into a war room. Every surface held something: stacks of printed bank statements, USB drives labeled by month, a corkboard pinned with screenshots and timelines. My monitors glowed deep into the night with spreadsheets, JSON files, and side-by-side comparisons. This wasn't about defending myself anymore. This was about building an unbreakable case. I worked systematically. Step 1: Location verification. I pulled 6 months of my Google timeline data, formatted the JSON into CSV, and overlaid it on a map. Every trip I'd taken was there, down to the minute. For each night Hannah claimed I was out, I annotated the exact coordinates, verified by both GPS and Wi-Fi triangulation. I color-coded discrepancies in red. There were plenty. Step 2: Financial trails. Next came the bank statements. I pulled PDFs directly from Chase's secure portal, verified their SHA-256 hashes, and matched every line item with my actual movements. Netflix rental on January 12th? GPS showed me at home. Grocery run at Jewel Osco on January 18th? GPS put me in the store's parking lot at that exact time. Meanwhile, Hannah's screenshots showed me across town, supposedly parked at an apartment complex. Step 3: Communications logs. I requested my call and SMS history from my carrier. The export was dry, timestamps, numbers, durations, but it was gold. On nights she claimed I was out, I was on the phone with Molly or in a group chat. Carrier logs are immutable, they don't bend to Photoshop. Step 4, Device Ecosystem. I dug into my Nest data, cross-referencing door sensor activity with thermostat logs. Nights she said I left at 11:30, the Nest showed no door opens after 10 p.m. The thermostat data, steady temperature curves, backed it up. Not once did the curve dip from a door letting in the Chicago winter air. Step 5, Cross-platform corroboration. I even checked app sync logs. My Spotify account showed me streaming a 90-minute playlist at home during one alleged cheating window. Timestamps aligned perfectly with my router logs, showing the same IP session. The deeper I went, the more her narrative unraveled. Every one of her claims fell apart under cross-examination. But raw data doesn't sway emotions. Screenshots feel real, while JSON files feel abstract. So I shifted gears. I began documenting my investigation like a case study. Screen recordings of me exporting data. Step-by-step walkthroughs showing how my GPS file contradicted her pins. Side-by-side images, her doctored Uber receipt versus my authentic PDF with a verifiable QR code. I built what I started calling the binder, a meticulously organized, chronological dossier. Printed sections, USB backups, even notarized copies of critical logs. If Hannah wanted to fight this in the public square, I was preparing for a trial. And then came the real breakthrough. Buried in her forged Uber screenshots, I noticed something tiny but fatal. One receipt timestamp was set in 24-hour format, 23:15, but Uber in the U.S. only exports consumer receipts in 12-hour format with AM/PM. It was a localization setting, something her forgery tool defaulted to. That was my smoking gun. Not just this doesn't match, but this could not possibly exist. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, adrenaline buzzing. For weeks, she'd been on the offensive. Now I had her mistake. And I knew exactly how I was going to use it. The flaw with liars is simple, they can only juggle so many details before one slips. Hannah's slip was small, a timestamp format, but it was enough to turn her entire story against her. I knew exposing it too soon would be pointless. If I called her out in private, she'd deny it, maybe backpedal, maybe vanish the evidence. No, I needed her to double down publicly, with the contradiction baked in, so she couldn't walk it back. So I baited her. I sent her a text. Calm. Cold. I know you're lying, Hannah. I can prove it. Stop now before this gets worse. I didn't expect her to stop. I expected her to escalate. And she did. That same night, she posted a new receipt, another Uber ride, same style as before. She captioned it, "Funny how he swears he was home. Here's the proof he wasn't." And there it was. The same error. A 24-hour timestamp, 21:48, slapped on an American Uber receipt. Impossible. I screen recorded everything, opening her Instagram, tapping into the story, pausing on the receipt, scrolling back to verify her account. Every action timestamped on my phone. Then I pulled her earlier screenshots, the ones she'd claimed were from my phone. Same formatting error. Same impossible artifact. It wasn't just one slip. It was a pattern. The contradiction was airtight. If her receipts were real, Uber itself had suddenly decided to rewrite how it formatted every consumer receipt in the country. If mine were real, hers were fabricated. And I had the unaltered originals, pulled directly from my account, with metadata and QR codes to prove it. The next step was careful. I didn't just want to show she was lying. I wanted her to trap herself deeper. So I sent another text. If those receipts are real, then you shouldn't mind showing the originals, right? Not screenshots. The emails. Predictably, she refused. I deleted them. But then she slipped again. 2 hours later, she posted another receipt, trying to prove she had more. Same impossible timestamp format. Same contradiction. By then, I had everything I needed. Her repeated, public claims. My screen recording showing her posts in real time. The verifiable originals from my Uber account. The unforgeable metadata proving hers couldn't exist. It wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. This was about turning the entire weight of her lie back onto her, so that when she fell, there would be no doubt why. And as I sat there, binder spread across my desk, recordings neatly stored, I realized something. Hannah had built a trap for me, a cage of false screenshots and whispers. But she hadn't noticed I'd built one for her too. And she'd already stepped into it. I knew the evidence I had could bury her, but it wouldn't mean anything unless she condemned herself in her own words. Screenshots could be argued, metadata could be dismissed as too technical. What I needed was something no one could dispute, Her voice, her lie, captured in real time against evidence that couldn't be faked. So I set the stage. Our mutual friends were still circling her orbit, whispering about me, avoiding my calls. I reached out to Marissa, the only one who hadn't completely cut me off. I told her I wanted to make peace, to have one last conversation with Hannah in front of neutral friends. Marissa, ever the mediator, agreed to set it up. We met at a quiet coffee shop on Belmont. Neutral ground. A place with free Wi-Fi, power outlets, and security cameras I'd already confirmed with the manager-captured audio. I came prepared. Phone in my pocket, screen recorder running, synced to a cloud backup. My binder tucked under my arm. When Hannah walked in, she looked smug, confident. She thought she'd won. The conversation started polite enough. Marissa tried to play peacemaker, asking if there was any chance of clearing the air. Hannah pounced. "He's lying to all of you," she said smoothly, sliding her phone across the table. "I have more proof." It was another Uber receipt. The same fatal flaw, 24-hour time formatting on a U.S. consumer account. I felt my pulse slow, not quicken. This was it. I leaned forward, calm. "That's interesting, Hannah." Because I pulled my own receipts directly from Uber. I opened my binder, flipped to the side-by-side printouts, and slid them across the table. "Notice the difference?" She glanced down, frowned. "Yours are fake. Mine are real." Perfect. The trap had closed. I nodded slowly. "So you're saying, on record, that this," I tapped her screenshot, "is a real Uber receipt? And that mine are fake?" "Yes," she snapped, loud enough for Marissa and the barista behind the counter to hear. "Yours are doctored. Everyone knows it." I didn't react. I didn't argue. I simply turned my phone around, showing the screen recording of me logging into my Uber account, pulling the receipts live, QR code scannable, timestamps verified. This is a screen recording of me exporting the originals. Timestamped, authenticated. Which means if mine are fake, then Uber themselves is forging data for me. Her face went pale. For the first time, she hesitated. I leaned back, voice steady. "And you've just said, clearly, that yours are real." Which is impossible, because Uber doesn't format receipts like that in the US. Anyone can check their account and see. Marissa's eyes widened. The barista froze mid-wipe of a table, listening. Hannah stammered, tried to pivot, but it was too late. The contradiction wasn't theoretical anymore. It was live, undeniable, captured on video, corroborated by third-party witnesses and surveillance. The cage door slammed shut. For weeks, she'd thrived on ambiguity, on the gray space between lies and truth. Now she was trapped in black and white, her claim versus verifiable reality. And I had every second of it recorded. I didn't rush. That was the hardest part, holding back when every nerve in my body wanted to slam the truth down on the table and demand everyone see it. But timing mattered. If I moved too early, Hannah could spin it as a misunderstanding. If I waited just long enough, her lie would collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. 2 days after the coffee shop confrontation, I had everything assembled. The screen recording of her doubling down on the forged receipts. My own verified Uber exports with QR codes intact. The side-by-side formatting error, 24-hour timestamps that Uber never used in the U.S. Witnesses, Marissa and the barista, both of whom heard Hannah's claim. CCTV footage from the cafe, obtained with the manager's permission, synced with my audio recording. It wasn't just evidence. It was a case file. I didn't post it online. That would have made it look like petty drama. Instead, I reached out to a tech columnist I followed, Evan Brooks, a local journalist who specialized in digital privacy and fraud. His articles dissected scams, exposing how small digital tells unraveled elaborate lies. If anyone would see the significance of the metadata, it was him. I sent him a concise email. "I've been accused of cheating with fabricated digital evidence. I can prove the evidence is forged with verifiable data. Would you be interested in seeing it?" He replied within hours. We met in his office downtown, a cramped space filled with cables, monitors, and piles of half-disassembled gadgets. I laid out the binder, walked him through the receipts, the GPS logs, the Nest data. I showed him how Hannah's proof contained formatting inconsistencies that couldn't exist. Evan leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. "She went through all this just to frame you?" "She didn't just go through it," I said quietly. "She thought she could get away with it." He tapped a pen against his notebook. "This is solid. Too solid to ignore." The article dropped 3 days later, the digital alibi, How metadata exposed a forgery. It wasn't sensational. It was clinical, methodical. Evan laid out how digital forensics works, how receipts and GPS logs can't be forged without leaving traces. He cited my case, without names, per my request, as a textbook example. But people didn't need names. They connected the dots. Within hours, Hannah's narrative started to unravel. Friends who had ghosted me suddenly texted, tentative apology slipping into their words. Jason called me outright, "Man, I'm sorry. I didn't know." The shift was fast and brutal. Hannah's own posts started filling with comments. "Wait, is this the case in that article? Your screenshots look fake as hell now. Explain the timestamps, Hannah." For the first time since this started, she went silent. No new posts. No new screenshots. Just a wall of disbelief closing in on her. Exposure wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks or public humiliation. It came like a tide, slow and inevitable, washing her credibility away piece by piece until nothing was left standing. And for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. But this wasn't the end. Exposure was only the beginning of the reversal. The silence from Hannah's side was louder than any accusation she'd ever thrown. For weeks she'd thrived on constant escalation, new screenshots, new evidence, new whispers fed into the crowd. But now? Nothing. And in that vacuum, people started talking. The same friends who had vanished one by one began trickling back, testing the waters with cautious texts and calls. Jason invited me for a drink. Marissa apologized, profusely, for doubting me. Even Molly, my sister, came by unannounced, holding takeout and shame in her eyes. "I should have believed you," she said softly. I didn't gloat. I didn't lecture. I just nodded, because the truth was enough. At work, the shift was even more stark. Colin, my manager, called me into his office. This time, his tone was different, no hesitation, no quiet suspicion. He gestured at a printout of Evan Brooks's article on his desk. "Daniel," he said, almost sheepish, "I owe you an apology. It seems you were the victim of something extraordinary." I wanted to tell him he was right, that extraordinary was one way to put it. But all I said was, I just wanted the truth on record. The reversal wasn't flashy. It wasn't about applause or vindication. It was about weight, weeks of suspicion lifting from my shoulders, the air finally clearing after a suffocating storm. And Hannah? Her credibility disintegrated. Friends unfollowed her, the same way they had unfollowed me. Only this time, no one came back. I heard through Marissa that she'd tried to spin another story, claiming she'd been tricked by someone else who faked the receipts for her. But it didn't matter. Once you're caught lying, no excuse can patch the hole. The fallout was quiet but merciless. Invitations dried up. The social circle that had once rallied behind her now treated her like a contagion. She wasn't hated, she was dismissed. Ignored. Irrelevant. And that, I realized, was the cruelest punishment of all. I didn't need her humiliated. I didn't need her destroyed. I just needed her exposed. Because exposure, once it happens, can't be undone. The reversal wasn't about me clawing my way back to where I'd been. It was about standing in a place where her lies couldn't reach me anymore. And as I looked at the wreckage she'd made, and the wreckage she'd become, I understood something. Hannah hadn't ruined me. She'd only ruined herself. By the time the dust settled, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had carried me through the first weeks, the sleepless nights, the frantic evidence gathering, the desperate need to prove I wasn't who she said I was. But anger doesn't last forever. It burns out, leaving something colder, steadier. I didn't see Hannah again. Not in person. Not online. Her posts stopped, her accounts went private, and then she disappeared from the circles we once shared. For a while, people still mentioned her name, always with the same tone, half curiosity, half dismissal. But eventually, even that faded. I thought exposing her would feel like victory. Instead, it felt like release. I kept the binder. Tucked it into the back of my closet, every receipt, every log, every contradiction sealed in plastic sleeves. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it reminded me of the truth. Lies can be loud, but data endures. Life began to stitch itself back together. My sister trusted me again. My friends came back, cautious at first, then warmer with time. At work, the tension evaporated, replaced by nods of respect I hadn't felt before. But something in me had changed. I didn't walk into rooms the same way. I didn't take trust for granted. I saw how fragile reputation was, how quickly it could be broken by a whisper, and how much harder it was to rebuild with facts. One night, weeks later, I sat on my balcony overlooking the city. The lights blinked across Chicago, each one a signal, a marker, a point on a map. I thought about all the data coursing through the air, pings from phones, logins, packets of truth that couldn't be erased. That was the irony Hannah never understood. She believed perception was stronger than reality. She thought screenshots could bury the truth. But GPS data doesn't lie. And in the end, the truth was patient. It waited, quiet and unshakable, until the lies collapsed under their own weight. I closed my eyes, leaned back in the chair, and let out a long breath. For the first time in a long time, I felt free.